Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Max Smith. I am the Communications Director for 501c Services. We're the administrator of the 501c Agencies Trust, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's town hall about COVID-19. We've been taking phone calls and emails for about 2-3 weeks now, and since the phones have died down a little bit, we've decided that we'd go ahead and get everybody on a phone call here and answer some of the most frequently asked questions we're getting, and then try to address anything that might have popped up for you all over the past couple of days. We have 3 folks on the call with us today, Gary, Sonia, and Nicole. They're going to scroll through some of our most frequently asked questions. As we go along, if you have a question, please feel free to shoot it to us via the questions box in the GoToMeeting user interface there. And then we will address those, as many of those as we can. We've found that a lot of you are asking the same questions, but we want to address anything as much as possible today. Some of your more state-specific and organization-specific questions, you're probably going to need to shoot us an email or give us a call to handle those privately. But we should be able to take the big dogs today. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Ms. Sonia, and she's going to go over some of our most frequently asked questions on the HR side.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Mac. First of all, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. Every day, you all are in the trenches working for and serving our country, and I'm really proud of the work you all do in your organizations. And let's admit it, life has gotten seriously crazy and complicated for you, for your staff, our families, and, well, for all of us. But thank you all for what you do. I've had the pleasure of talking with so many of you over the years and so many more of you in the last few weeks. I think it's important to acknowledge that we are living in a world with few clear answers, and what is true today may not be true tomorrow. Some of the questions that you've asked, we just can't answer because we just don't have the answer. Even our trusted employment law attorneys at Littler and Fisher Phillips have shared that they don't know either. And strangely enough, that made me feel a little bit better. As many of you are aware, Maureen and I work really hard to know the answers to your questions, and if we don't know, we research and find the answer. But lately, we've had to respond with a lot of, I'm sorry, I just don't know yet. Yesterday, I would have said that we were waiting for the Department of Labor and other attorneys to provide us with some input, interpretation, sample policies, and the required posters and guidance with the new FFCRA. However, we did get something from the Department of Labor, and we have posted that at the end. It's in your slides, and it's I believe at the end of the webcast. So a little bit of clarification in some areas, but not in every area. So it will be an evolving area. So anyway, this is hard stuff, really hard. It's uncharted territory, and I know that we're going to get through this. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind. And I want to let you know you're not alone. Call us, email us. There are no stupid questions. All right. So let's just dive into those questions and know, again, like Max said, that we will have time for questions. So feel free to type them into that box. So our first question, what's the difference between a furlough and a layoff? So in the beginning of all this, and that was not so long ago, we were talking furloughs. Now we are advocating using the term layoff, and here's why. Even though the words have been used interchangeably and to me mean similar things, which is a lack of work. Yesterday I was saying, it's just semantics. However, we know of at least one state that has denied furlough unemployment claims, so we are now advocating that you use the term layoff. So in terms of the word furlough, one school of thought is that a furlough is considered to be an alternative to a layoff. When an employer furloughs its employee, it's requiring them to work fewer hours or to take a certain amount of unpaid time off. An employer can require all employees to go on a furlough, or it may exclude some employees who provide essential services. But generally, the theory is to have the majority of employees share some hardship, as opposed to a few employees losing their jobs completely. A layoff can be a temporary separation from payroll and is typically not a reduction in force or a RIF. An employee is laid off typically because there is not enough work for him or her to perform. Now, we are hoping that these are all temporary, a temporary layoff with the goal of recalling those that have been laid off when work becomes available. And employees are typically able to collect unemployment benefits while on an unpaid layoff. And often, as I know that so many of you are trying to do, employers will allow their employees to maintain benefit coverage for a certain defined period of time. And I know that Nicole's going to talk about this from a UI perspective as well. All right, our next question. Oh, so the other part of this first one, is one better than the other? Right now I'm saying yes. Use the term layoff and lack of work due to COVID-19. So next question. What is the difference between furlough versus terminating an employee? Well, when you furlough, as we are requesting that you say now, temporary layoffs, the intent is for this to be temporary. The goal is to bring employees back when we can get back to business. When we terminate someone, the implication is typically permanent. We don't intend to call them back when we reopen for business. Now, if you decide to terminate employees, know that due to your state's laws or whatever's in your personnel policies, you may need to pay out accrued unused vacation and holiday time, plus offer COBRA if applicable. Next question. Are there other benefit resources that employees can go to besides unemployment to deflect the deficit of income experienced during the COVID-19 crisis? Great question, and it's one that we've been hearing in the last 2 weeks from many of you. And unfortunately, I'm not aware of anything else at this point, although just this morning I did hear something that some employees may qualify for help through FEMA. I have absolutely no more information than that, and as we learn more, we will post information on our website. But that was the first time I had heard any other resource, perhaps for employees besides unemployment. Now, we're all waiting to hear on phase 3 of the bailout, so we will stay tuned. Now, I have heard that a lot of grocery stores in at least our area, I know, are rapidly trying to hire part-time temporary help because it's become such a burden on their current employees. So if you have grocery stores, Amazon fulfillment centers, that sort of thing, they're all looking for emergency workers. So that might be helpful as well. All right, next question. Do companies have to issue last checks for furloughs and last checks, meaning to include PTO payouts? Yesterday I would have said no, but today I just read right before our session, a California employment law attorney said yes, you should be paying, even for furloughs, that you should be paying that out. I don't have, again, this is one I don't have a perfect answer for you. To me, a layoff typically has been you do not have to pay without accrued unused vacation because you're not terminating somebody's employment. So I would encourage you, if you've got an employment law attorney on retainer, to ask that question. All right, next question. At present, we are paying our staff people when they don't come into work due to slowdowns in the workload. We may not be able to sustain that policy if it continues over many weeks. Is there aid for employees on the horizon, and how will it be available? This question is similar to what we just talked about. We're waiting for phase 3 and what relief and assistance will be available to employers beyond unemployment. So we just don't know at this point. I'm sorry. Next question. Can FFCRA leave be implemented early? I believe a lot of you are already trying to pay employees, keep them on payroll, and let them access any accrued unused time. And at this point in time, I would not classify any sick leave paid out previously as FFCRA. The Act is fairly specific, at least in the DOL information I read today, that this Act is not retroactive. And it does not go into effect until April 1st. So I hope that answers your question. I would not implement it early. If you're going to pay people for special sick leave, it needs to be something that they already have on the books or something that you do as an employer that's generous. But it won't, I would not classify it as FFCRA until April 1st. All right, next question. Mac? Nope. All right, let's see. Next question. Let's see, we're 7. Does the 80-hour cap of FFCRA leave apply to employee sick only, or does it also include when the employee is caring for a child or sick family member? The 80 hours of emergency sick leave, that's prorated time for your part-time employees, is intended for both the employee and care for family members. Now, the employee may also qualify under the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, which then provides another 10 to 12 weeks. Actually, it's 10 weeks. If you access the 80 hours, which is the 2 weeks before, then it's another 10 weeks, depending on a few things and how the time off is classified. All right, next question, number 8. We are interested in what resources are available to help pay staff who may need to self-quarantine due to symptoms or who actually have confirmed cases of COVID-19 and are out of work for days when they run out of accrued sick. This is where that paid sick leave and paid family leave comes in. And if you want a clear explanation of the Act, we have the information, like I said, posted. It'll be on the website, and it is available on the slides when we're done. I believe it's at the end. Okay, our next question. Families first compliance when folks are trying to work from home. I'm not aware of any differences in the Act and, employees working from home. Remember, this is supposed to be income for people who are not working or can't work. Now, if you have employees that are working from home and they're non-exempt, make sure that they are tracking all time worked. You pay them for all time work, and they still need to abide by all laws and regulations regarding meals and breaks, just like when they're at the work site. All right, next question. Now, just to let everybody, my slides have frozen, so I believe we're on question 10. If we have a program that has to be laid off, is it better to do this April 1st for benefits? Now, that's a call that I can't make for you. We always advocate that employers should err on the side of being generous when at all possible. as well as balancing the long-term needs of your organization. And remember, on April 1st, FFCRA goes into effect. So, next question. If we keep people now but end up letting them go later, what's the downside? And again, that's one I just don't know. There may be relief later. We're hoping that this flattens out sooner, or things, spike up. We just don't know here. Next question. For those who work part-time on call and do not accrue sick and vacation leaves, how is our organization going to handle the mandatory staying at home policy? Well, as of April 1st, all employees will be entitled to FFCRA. Beyond that, if there are not benefits earned, there is no duty to pay if no work is performed. All right, next question. FMLA changes related to temporary school closures, and how does it impact layoffs? Well, prior to COVID-19, if you were going to do a layoff and somebody was out on FML, you could still lay them off if the layoff would have happened if they were not on a leave. Now, I honestly don't know. We need to wait and see, and we're hoping that we'll get some kind of interpretations or guidance from the DOL beyond what we've already gotten. I did not see anything in the DOL FAQs or the piece for employers that addressed that part. So let's see, next question. I think that's all my question. I did want to say, nobody asked about the WARN Act. I did just read that in California, our governor has suspended the 60-day notice requirement. And I would be surprised if other states have not. So I'm guessing that most states are going to waive that notice, and the federal WARN will too. However, I don't know that for federal or other states. I just know that our governor in California has suspended that 60-day notice period. So I believe I've gotten through all of my questions, and again, we'll open it up for any other HR questions and UI questions. So, Mac, who's up next?
Yes. Okay, so before we move to Gary, this is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that Sonia's been talking about. If you all check your handout section of the GoToMeeting platform, we have a FAQ or summary of that act there for you to download. That will also be emailed to you all following this program. So that's what that is. And there's a couple of questions in the queue about the Families First Act. You can find most of your answers in there. If it doesn't help clarify everything for you, then you all can just holler at Sonia offline, and she'll be
Maureen
happy to answer. Or Maureen, we'll be happy to. Now I'm just directing all calls to you, Sonia.
Right.
But so that's what that is there for. So that should answer a couple of questions in the queue. Now we're going to move on to Gary. Gary, you need me to read the questions for you since you are having trouble logging in.
Oh, no, I think I have him here. I should be good.
Okay. All right. It's all yours.
Thank you, Sonia and Mac. Hello, everybody. I believe the first question that we've received quite often is dealing with how will the COVID-19 layoffs impact an organization's state unemployment insurance rate? And the answer to that is actually, as a member of the trust or reimbursing employer, which you all are, you actually do not have a quote-unquote rate through the state. You are simply reimbursing the state on a dollar-for-dollar basis on actual unemployment benefit charges paid out to your former employees. In fact, theoretically, your SUI rate is actually zero with regard to your state unemployment. also just a little FYI, as a nonprofit, 501c3, you are already automatically exempt from the federal unemployment rate, otherwise known as FUTA. So, in a sense, there's no adjustment to any rates or anything along those lines, as you're a reimbursing employer through the trust. So next up, the next question, I believe, is if an employee files for unemployment, will the claim be paid by the state's unemployment insurance and not your 501c trust account, since it's a national emergency? And actually, the answer to that is when an individual files for unemployment and is deemed eligible by the state for benefits, they will begin to pay that individual on a weekly basis. Once the given quarter or month, depending on the frequency in which your state bills, most states do operate quarterly, but there are quite a few that do operate on a monthly basis with regards to invoicing us for those benefit charges. We will then reimburse the state, aka pay that bill for whatever occurred that prior month or quarter on your behalf from the funds that you have built up in your reserve account over the previous years. The current situation regarding COVID-19 has not changed that process at all, and individuals will continue to be paid, will continue to reimburse out of your account, and as far as that process goes, we don't see any change with regards to how individuals are receiving their funds or where they come from. And as Sonia mentions, things can change, but at this time, that's still the process in place. Moving on to the next question, I believe is, you're curious if your reserve fund is not adequate for these layoffs, these mass layoffs due to the crisis. Your employees are worried that since you're self-insured for unemployment, that means they won't be able to collect unemployment benefits if you were to shut down for any period of time. If you exhaust your reserve fund, what happens then? What should our employees about what should you tell your employees about their unemployment benefits? And in a sense, that is fairly straightforward as well, is that first and foremost, your employees have nothing to worry about regarding how you have chosen to finance your unemployment. The state will pay them benefits they are eligible for each and every week, regardless of how you fund your unemployment. If there is a time your reserves are exhausted and we receive a reimbursable bill from the state, we will then reach out to you, the employer, with a special invoice explaining that deficiency in order for us to make a payment on your behalf. If we do not receive the funds from you, we will then return that bill to you for direct pay to the state. And at that point, depending on your financial situation and so forth, you can work out with the state directly, whether it's a payment plan or what have you. But to reiterate, even in this extreme example, if you were unable to reimburse the state for benefits they've been paying your former employees, they will always continue to pay those claimants, even if you go several months if it's a monthly state, or several quarters if it's a quarterly state, without living up to your obligation per se as far as reimbursing the state for those benefits. Your former employees would never ever receive any negative impact due to that extreme scenario. I believe that may have been the last question under my section, Mac. Is that correct, or is there another one? Correct. If so, if you could read it.
No, that's you. Those three, and then we'll move on to Nicole. But before we get started on Nicole's section, if I could have both Gary and Nicole just qualify some of these questions we have in the We do have a number of questions in the queue, and we've talked about this a little bit offline. We can just go ahead and bring this discussion forward. There's a lot of questions in the queue about whether or not the current Senate plan that was agreed to last night and is being most likely being signed today, will that provide any tax relief to reimbursing employers for these COVID-19 charges? Now, my understanding, and Nicole can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we do not know yet. There is advocacy going on by organizations like ours and organizations like Nicole's over at Equifax to try to protect reimbursing employers with all of this COVID-19 claims. But at this point, we don't have a solid answer yet. So that should answer the questions in the queue about what's going on with the helping reimbursers with their charges. We don't have an answer yet, but that seems to be getting clearer as we go here. And with that, I think we can hand it off to Ms. Nicole.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so let's start with the basics because I think that it's important to understand some of the foundational things so that I can expand upon that when answering some of the later questions. And I know Sonia mentioned this, but I'm also going to give somewhat of a disclaimer in the fact that I can only answer these questions in what is true today, meaning in the traditional sense, here is how this would work. However, in this constantly evolving situation, tomorrow that could change. So I will caveat some of these things where I can, just to give you an idea. So first and foremost, who can file for unemployment benefits? I've been getting a lot of questions about, part-time employees and on-call employees, et cetera. The answer to that is very simple. Anyone can file for unemployment, okay? Full-time, part-time, exempt, non-exempt, does not matter. However, eligibility is a separate issue. So once someone files for unemployment, the way that it is determined if they're eligible is the state is going to look if the employee has eligible wages in the base period. The base period is typically the first 4 of the last 5 completed quarters. There are a couple states that just use the last 4, so Massachusetts uses last 4, but the majority, it's the first 4 of the last 5. So if you filed today, that's October of 2018 through September of 2019. Come April 1st, that shifts to calendar year 2019. And what they're looking at is all wages paid by all of, any employer that paid them during that period of time, as long as they meet the minimum requirement for some type of benefit, and as long as they're eligible based on all of the other, criteria, such as being separated due to no fault of their own and being available for work, those types of things, then they should be considered eligible. Those wages that were paid in the base period will determine a couple of things. It will determine first, how much that person will be eligible to collect if they are fully unemployed, and that is known as the weekly benefit amount. And you will hear me refer to that later, so I did want to clarify what that was. The weekly benefit amount is the amount they are eligible to receive if they were fully unemployed. The base period also is going to determine which employers are chargeable and what their portion is. And again, you're going to hear me say this a lot, so I apologize for the broken, record here, but there are a lot of state-by-state sort of differences or quirks. Generally, most states, I think it's like 36 or 37 of them, charge proportionately. So that means that, if you paid 30% of the wages in that period, you're responsible for 30% of the benefits. There are a couple states that, have like a last 30-day employer, that sort of thing. But either way, the state, depending on whatever state you're in, the state will look at those wages and they will determine if they're eligible, how much they're eligible for, and who's going to be chargeable. Okay, next slide. Okay, is there partial unemployment benefits for reduced hours? The answer to that is yes, depending on how much they're earning and how reduced their hours are. So you heard me talk about the state calculating the weekly benefit amount. So in terms of partial unemployment, what the state is going to do is first determine the full weekly benefit amount that they would be eligible for. And then each week, that employee will need to report their wages that they're earning to the state. And every state has a different calculation, but they will then plug those earnings into that calculation with the weekly benefit amount and determine what their partial benefit will be. And so what I can tell you in general, the states typically offset about 20 to 25% of those wages, which typically results in a little bit overall higher compensation, because they don't deduct the wages you've earned 100%, right? They usually offset at about 20 to 25% depending on the state, which usually results in a little bit of a higher total compensation. Next question. Okay, so a lot of questions about how special pay works with unemployment, such as vacation or sick time. And so the answer to that is you should report any special pay. Okay, so anytime you are responding to an unemployment claim, please report any special payments that have been made. That being said, not all states view special pay the same way. Some states deduct vacation and sick pay from unemployment. Some states only vacation pay. Some states don't deduct either. Some states deduct both. So it really just depends on your specific state and what their rules are regarding special pay. I can tell you that the general rule is if you're earning some sort of pay at full pay rate, you're probably not going to be eligible for unemployment for those weeks. That doesn't mean you can't collect after those payments are over. Now, in terms of full and permanent layoffs, I do want to speak to that as well because some of you may have to do permanent layoffs. For that, you might be offering some sort of maybe a severance or accrued vacation time paid out, that sort of thing. Again, it's going to vary state by state, but there are some states that do not deduct severance from unemployment, and there's other states that will deduct it only if it's allocated. So again, just a lot of state-by-state specifics. So I would recommend, either reaching out to us to help you determine that, or to simply look on your state's website to determine if the payments are disqualifying in your state. To be honest with you, though, really the general rule of thumb is just report it and let the state determine if those payments are deductible. Next question. Okay, this one is a big one. I've gotten a lot of questions on how someone can calculate what this is going to cost them. What is my exposure? How do I determine, what's the best financial decision for us in terms of salary continuation or, doing a partial layoff, that sort of thing. I'm going to give you a short answer, but with a really long caveat, okay? The short answer is you can't. It would be nearly impossible for you to do that, and I'll tell you why. We talked about how the weekly benefit amounts are determined, and you may have heard me say that they're using all wages from all base period employers. So unless every single one of your employees has only ever worked for you in the last few years, it would be very difficult for you to know what wages by quarter are in that base period and what percentage of those wages are yours and what percentage are you liable for. In addition to that, if you've got people doing, partial benefits, you don't know what they're going to collect each week because it's going to vary. And to further add to that complexity, you may have folks that have left your organization up to 18 months ago that are now filing because they've been separated from a subsequent employer, and you are now responsible for your portion of the charges. So you can't possibly predict how many of those will come back on you as well. So it's really not possible, to be perfectly honest with you, to calculate that, unfortunately. You can use some generalities. I mean, obviously, if you're doing full pay and salary continuation, that's obviously going to be optimal for your employees as well as your reserve account. But you're paying at full rate, whereas unemployment, you're paying at about a 50 to 60% rate typically. Unemployment is typically meant to replace about 50% of your annual weekly wage. It varies slightly by state, and there is a maximum cap, so higher wage earners don't usually hit that 50% mark, but that's the general rule, okay? So if you think about it in terms of that might help you make some decisions. And then with partial benefits, again, they're going to be able to collect a little bit more than they would with a full temporary layoff. So hopefully that helps, but unfortunately, that's just not something that you can calculate with any type of certainty. Okay, next question. Okay, what if we are still paying employees their full wages and they file for benefits anyway? I've actually heard this question from quite a few, and while, I would say I'm surprised that folks are filing when they're receiving full benefits, it's actually not that uncommon. They may be anticipating a future layoff, maybe trying to get ahead of the curve. What I would say is if you are still paying them at their normal wages and benefits, they are not unemployed, and you should report it that way. So if you get a claim on an individual that is still, working, maybe they're not physically performing services, but they're still being paid as if they're there performing services, they're not underemployed or unemployed. So I would respond in that way. Now, if you have additional information about a future layoff and you have a certainty of a date, so maybe you've agreed to pay these individuals for 4 additional weeks, and as of X date, that's when those wages will stop. You can certainly let the state know that as well, but these individuals will not be allowed to collect while they are earning regular wages. So just report that information to the state just as you would any other type of pay and allow them to make their decisions. I do want to give you a little bit of comfort in knowing that, the claimant, your employees, are also responsible for reporting, legally, they're responsible for reporting any wages as well. So I know things get a little bit hectic and employers are getting a little bit stressed about making sure that they're getting information back timely to the state. But just know that it's two-sided, and if in the absence of your information, they will take the information from the claimant and make their decision. Okay, next question. Okay, what separation reasons should we use when responding to claims? Okay, I have 2 codes for you. As a member of the trust, you will be using our platform. So I can say with confidence that you can use one of 2 codes if it's COVID-19 related. So we've got one code that is lack of work COVID, and that's in the Case Builder tool, 7691, I believe is the code. You definitely want to use that code for any lack of work associated with COVID-19. Because as Sonia mentioned, and I believe Gary mentioned it as well, we're still waiting on the final legislation. We don't know what's going to happen. And if we need to be able to go back and trace those charges back to COVID-19 claims, we're going to have the ability to do that because we've set up a code specifically for those claims. Let me reassure you that if you're working with our claims consultants here, you may have not known that and just responded with lack of work. But I can assure you that if they know it's in relation to a COVID shutdown or reduction in staff, they are changing the code on our end to that lack of work COVID code. So please, be reassured that is happening, and we're doing everything we can to flag those claims. The other option that you have is for individuals who may have voluntarily separated themselves due to COVID-19. Now, we don't know how that's going to play out, and I'm actually going to address that on another slide. But what I would say is just go ahead and use the code that's appropriate. So if they have self-quarantined because they're worried about social distancing, or they are not, accepting work because of something COVID related, but maybe work's available, we do have another code that is a personal leave COVID is the description. So that's to just sort of delineate between involuntary and voluntary. Next question. Okay, so we just talked about this, and this is where I'm going to expand on this a little bit more. So what if an employee is choosing to stay home because of social distancing, but we have work available? All right, so here's the deal with this. I'm going to answer how this would be handled in a traditional unemployment environment, and then of course I'm going to give you a little bit of a caveat or a disclaimer. So in traditional unemployment, if work is available and the employee is not actively seeking said available work, they would not be eligible for unemployment. Okay, so there's 5 criteria that the state looks at, and I kind of touched on those earlier. And you know, you as the employer typically only get involved with the reason for separation, but you might also get involved with an availability issue because maybe the reason the person is separated is legitimate, but then maybe on the back end they're not doing something to make themselves available. So in a normal, you know, normal circumstances, pardon me, this individual would not be eligible for unemployment because work is available and they are choosing not to go to work. However, we don't know how the CARE Act is going to impact that. In addition to that, the first phase of the bill did offer flexibility to the various states on how they interpret someone's availability under the COVID-19 you know, pandemic. So unfortunately, I can't tell you if they're going to find that person to be eligible. What I will tell you is historically, no, they would not have been eligible, but under this environment, they could be eligible. And we just don't know for sure. So just respond to the claim like you always would and allow the state to make that determination. Okay, next question. Okay, this one, we've already touched on it, but I'll just touch on it again because this is obviously the big one that everyone is asking. You know, how will I be charged for these benefits and will there be any government relief for self-insured employers? So again, we are waiting for the CARE Act. We are waiting for the bills to be passed so that they can be interpreted and then communicated. So we appreciate any patience that you can give us with that. It has not been fully approved or passed yet, so we can't even begin to take that document and sort of break it down. But I can tell you that we're all anxiously waiting. As soon as that information is available, we will review it, and there will be, I'm sure, tons of communication via various electronic methods to be able to find that information. So I apologize because this is the #1 question we get, but we just don't know what's going to happen at this point. Okay, next question. Okay, I believe this is my last one, but it's a little bit detailed. So we did receive a lot of state-specific questions, and this isn't necessarily the right forum to address state-specific scenarios. I have been addressing them, and I know Sonia has as well from an HR perspective, and also Gary. We've been addressing state-specific questions via, email and phone calls, and so we encourage you to continue doing that, and we'll help you as best we can. But I'm going to give you some general guidelines here. For example, duration. A lot of people are asking, well, what's the length of time that someone can collect benefits? What I can tell you is that, again, it varies by state. It used to be pretty much 26 weeks across the board, except for maybe 1 or 2 states, but that has changed since the recession. And so now it's anywhere from about 13 to 26 weeks. There might be one state that still gives 30, but it's roughly 13 to 26 under normal unemployment provisions. So if that will change, I don't know, but right now it's anywhere from 13 to 26. Waiting weeks. Not all states have a waiting week. Some states that do have a waiting week have already waived that waiting week. But again, that is state specific, and you'll have to consult your state specific website to find out if your employees will experience a waiting week when filing for benefits. Again, work search is going to vary by state. I would imagine that for any temporary layoff, that work search will likely be waived under the circumstances, but I can't say that with 100% certainty. So again, consult your state's specific guidelines. I'm sure as these employees are filing for benefits, they'll be informed if they're required to complete work searches or not. Work share programs, another big question we are getting. What I want to say on that is those are our state administered programs. They're similar, but maybe some varying differences by that particular state. But the employer works directly with the state in those cases. And so, my company, we're not involved in work share programs. So I can't really answer much about them. But what I will tell you is that they're really not a whole lot different than traditional partial filing. I think the idea behind work share programs are if you're going to do, so say in normal times when none of this craziness is going on, maybe you're going to do a temporary, some work reductions or, furloughs or, whatever you want to, however you want to classify it, and you're worried about losing your workforce and you want to make the experience as palatable for your employees as possible so that you can retain them. Work share programs are sort of meant to do that because the employer takes on the burden of sort of reporting the weekly wages on behalf of the employees. The employees still have to file their own individual claim to start with, but then the employer gives the state a list of participants, files an application, and then is responsible for the reporting. Whereas if you do traditional, just tell the employee to file and let the chips fall where they may, that employee would then just be responsible for reporting their own weekly wages. The employer may be asked for some clarification on those as well, but that's really the only difference that I can see. But again, I am not an expert. I do not work for the state, and therefore I'm not an expert on work share programs. But there's lots of information out there on the internet. So lots of FAQs. So if you're curious, you can certainly check those out. Okay. The last question that we received is wanting to know if there was a way to maybe mass upload claims filings to the state in order to sort of expedite things and just make the process a little bit easier for maybe employers that have a very large population that's being impacted. I don't have a full answer on that, but I'm going to give you a couple examples. So the first thing I'll say is obviously check your specific state's website to see if they have any sort of bulk filing, if you will. I do know of some states that do have such a program, like I believe Massachusetts might be one of them. So you just have to check your specific state website to find out. You could literally just search, bulk unemployment claim filing or mass unemployment claim filing and then put your state in. The other thing, there's other states like Alabama and Georgia that are requiring, or really trying to mandate that employers file these using some sort of a spreadsheet or upload through their website. So again, very state specific. So make sure you just know what's going on in your state. The one thing I will say is that while I can't speak to the state by state uploads, from a response perspective, so when it comes to working with your claims consultants at Equifax on the response to those claims, we did send out templates to all the claims contacts with instructions in case they wanted to provide a mass upload. Now, this does not file the claim for your employee. We can't file claims for your employees. They have to file the claim. But what this does is instead of you getting 100 individual emails or notifications in Case Builder that you've got to go in and fill out almost the same information for everybody, you could just send us a mass list. We can upload that into our system. So if a claim is filed and we receive it, we can immediately respond to the state. We won't have to reach out to you unless additional information is required. And we can get, those employees their benefits a little bit quicker. Because, I've heard from a lot of you that the state websites are having issues or that you're not able to get in touch with someone at the state. What I can tell you is the amount of volume is the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And the states are not prepared to handle that volume. And so there are going to be some delays. But we don't want to add to that delay, right? What we're trying to do is just make the process a little bit easier for you and try to get your employees, their benefits as quickly as we can. So with sending a proactive list, that's going to be the best and quickest way to do it. As soon as we get that claim, our system will automatically send that response back to the state and let them know that it is a lack of work, and allow them to make their decision quickly. So that's really the best way as far as responding to claims. But unfortunately, you'll have to check with your individual state in terms of doing any sort of mass filing for your employees. I believe that was my last question. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe at this point we can maybe take some additional questions if we have time.
Absolutely. Okay, so we do have a few, sarcasm included there, questions. We're not going to be able to get to everybody. What I can do is if we do not address your question, I can hand your question off to the appropriate team member at the trust, and then we can get back to you. That may not be this afternoon, but we will get back to you as soon as possible if we don't address your question here on the webinar, and even if we need to follow up with some additional information. So, and a lot of those questions we're not going to be able to answer, folks, or maybe a state-specific question, and definitely a employer-specific question. If you're asking a question specifically about your account, you wouldn't want us answering that in mixed company anyhow. So those questions need to be addressed to us directly. But if my speakers could unmute their lines, because I'm a lay person, I'm not going to know who's going to know the answer to some of these, but I will try my best here. Here we have a question from Melissa. If we do have a temporary salary reduction for exempt staff, would they qualify for unemployment if they have a temporary salary deduction?
Sure. So this is Nicole. The answer to that is possibly. It depends on what they would have qualified for in full unemployment and what their salary reduction entails. So if you need a state-specific calculation, you can reach out to me and I'll try to get that back to you as quick as I can. But generally speaking, it's possible. But if they're earning too much versus what their weekly benefit amount would be, they may not be eligible for anything. So it just depends.
And also, Nicole, we have a couple of questions about some lag time. We've got folks who've already laid off staff and they're already getting paid unemployment, but the member actually hasn't gotten any paperwork from the state yet. Are you seeing that type of thing across the board, or is that something they should check on?
Yeah, I spoke to someone earlier that expressed similar concerns, and I kind of touched on the fact that the states are just really overwhelmed. If a claim is issued, it's either going to go to your employer location or it's going to come to us. Ideally, it comes to us, but in some cases, the states, they're just not real efficient, and sometimes they do send the claim to the employer instead. So if you haven't received anything via paper and you haven't received a notification from Equifax, chances are we haven't received the claim yet. And I would not be surprised at all if if you hear from your employees about additional delays from the state, because frankly, this is just, they can't possibly adjudicate and process all of these claims as quickly as they're coming in. So I would expect some delays.
Okay. This is probably for Sonia. If staff has been quarantined and they most likely came into contact with other employees, what's the employer's role in forcing these other employees to self-isolate? Are you allowed to send people home for quarantine if they're not sick, but they came in contact with somebody who's obviously sick or themselves been tested?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. I would be proactive, and if you can. And remember, you are not to disclose the staff person's name to other staff of the person who came down with coronavirus. So it is your duty under OSHA to provide a safe and healthy workplace. So you would definitely want to let people know that somebody has come down with it and there was exposure to others, and provide them the opportunity to self-isolate.
And Sonia, while you're warm here, talking about PTO for temporary laid off and furloughed staff, what's the best way to handle if they have PTO on the books for those folks, if they're laid off, if they're temporarily laid off, or versus furloughed?
Yeah, well, it just varies. Yesterday, my response would have been, let them access it, but you don't have to pay it out if you're going to do a temporary layoff. Today, based on what I saw, I think if at all possible, pay it out.
Okay, and also you had spoken earlier about how you had gotten information where you are now recommending people lay off staff rather than furlough. If a member has already communicated to staff that they are on furlough, is there a recommendation to come back and use different language on the layoff side, or is that just something that we can't answer for them?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I think if things are going through at the state level, like I said, there was one state that we've heard of. If you're in North Carolina, I know that as folks were applying for unemployment, when they used the term furlough, they were being denied benefits. And we've suggested that if that's the case, and it's all due to COVID-19, that they appeal. So that's why we are now switching to using temporary layoff. But make sure that it's a lack of work due to COVID-19. If you want to send out something to your employees saying that it's now a temporary layoff, I think it may just confuse people and upset people. So I probably wouldn't do anything at this time unless you're finding out that your staff are being denied unemployment benefits.
So, and just to add to that, sorry, Mac, this is Nicole. Just to add to that, I don't know why the state is denying that. That's very strange. But what I will say is, from an employer's perspective, when we're responding to those claims, we don't even have the option to choose furlough in our system. So when we are responding to the state, we will make sure that we're communicating for you on your behalf that it is a lack of work. So to Sonia's point, I don't think you necessarily need to track everybody down and correct that, because I think in most cases we'll get our message across, and it's just a difference of terminology, but maybe just on a go forward basis, right? Maybe just avoid that term.
That's good. Thank you. And I think that the folks that we were hearing from were not trust members. They were subscribers.
Okay, and before I get to the next question, just going to throw this slide up there, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We have that summary in the handout section, and you'll be emailed it later today. There are some questions in there on the Families First Corona Response Act. Sonia referred to it as the FFCRA at one point. It's the same thing. You all should check that summary out. It should have an answer to your question there. It's a good clarifying document. If you still have questions, then you should come back to Sonia and Maureen about that.
Mark, I have a quick question. In there, did we reference the Department of those pieces I sent. I wasn't sure if that was in there or not.
I believe so. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. And if not, maybe we can include those in the email that goes out.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can find some of those here.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's trying to make sure I answer a question that more than one person asked. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to read through these. Nicole, there's a lag state question here, I believe, talking about people who are working part-time or just been, did I just lose you all?
I'm sorry, Mac, what was the question?
I'm sorry, I got a fancy sound from my GoToMeeting. I thought maybe you all had dropped. I apologize for that. For an employee who was part-time and did not work very long at a trust member, and so their salary history probably doesn't pass the 4 quarters, that's going to be considered in their unemployment benefits, correct?
Well, so yes, as of right now, as it stands today, but again, it's not just from their employment, remember? So they might be working part-time for you, but they might have had other wages from other employers in that base period, and it's a combination of all employers. So what I would say is, as it stands today, if they have not earned enough monetarily, they will not be eligible to collect a benefit. They have to have a minimum number of wage credits in there to be eligible. However, as of, whenever the CARE Act passes, it's very possible that that's going to change. So keep an eye out for that, because there may be some provisions involving folks that wouldn't otherwise qualify.
Okay. And then, Nicole, while I have you here, folks are asking about the reason for separation. You had indicated to mark COVID-19. Some folks are saying it's not we've gotten this in other forms, it's not a selection option. Some folks are using natural disaster. Can you give some recommendations as to what folks should be putting in when they file these claims for the state as to what the reason of separation is and some best practices?
Okay, so yeah, and I apologize. I had thought everybody on this particular call were members, and so in that case, it is an option to use the lack of work. I think it's actually lack of work national tragedy, I think is what it is, and then it says COVID. So that's the option you would want to use if you're with us. If you're responding directly to the state, then you just want to identify that it is a lack of work related to COVID. You may not have a code for that, depending on how you are providing this information. So choose lack of work. They're always going to have that as an option. And then if there's some sort of free field text box somewhere that you can type that it's a result of COVID, definitely put that in there so that those can be tracked later.
Okay. And if someone uses your Nicole, your suggestion, and we'll just do this as the last question, and then we'll try to follow up with everybody offline. If someone uses your route of creating a mass list, how do they confirm employees' wages and still complete the claim through Case Builder? Could you go over that again for them?
Okay, so I think what you're referring to is if these employees are getting some sort of a special pay or maybe a payout, there is a field on that template that says special pay type, and then we have a key that tells you what each is coded. So like if it's vacation or salary continuation or sick pay, it'll give you a code, and you just put that code in that column. And then next to it, it'll ask you what the total amount of pay is going to be. And then in the column next to that, it's just going to ask you what is the number of days that this pay represents. So that's how you would report it to us if you're using the spreadsheet template. But again, I mean, don't stress too much about it. The employee is also legally required to report any wages they're receiving as well.
All right, well, we still have questions. We could go on for a while, but we're going to go ahead and take these offline. If you've submitted questions, we'll try to have the appropriate team member follow up with you, and I have to stress this, as soon as possible. If you have an immediate need, you should feel free to try and give us a call, but we'll try to get to everybody as soon as possible here. And just to clarify, the summary guide for the CareFirst summary will be emailed to you later today, along with a copy of this deck and a copy of the recording in about an hour. So give us about an hour and we'll get that to everybody who's on the call. And Gary, Sonia, and Nicole, I appreciate you all being here with us, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you all. Stay healthy out there.
Yep.